The storm and the miracle. The sun was high in the sky, bathing the park in warm, golden light. It was one of those perfect days when the world felt alive, buzzing with energy. Birds chirped from the treetops, and children's laughter echoed across the playground. 8-year-old Jason Maxwell was in his element, darting around the park with his well-worn soccer ball. His sandy hair flopped in the breeze as he chased the ball, his sneakers barely touching the ground. Jason's mother, Emily, had dropped him off at the park, reminding him to be home by dinner. He knew she was in the middle of something important. She always was. Jason loved the park. It was his escape from the seriousness of life at home, where his mother worked long hours, and his father had disappeared from their lives years ago. The park was a place of freedom, where he could imagine himself as a world-famous soccer player, scoring the winning goal in the final moments of a big game. But today, the park was going to be the stage for something far more extraordinary. As Jason kicked the ball, he noticed the sky was changing. Dark clouds crept in from the horizon, slowly blotting out the bright blue. The wind picked up, tugging at his t-shirt and making the branches overhead sway. Weird, he thought. It had been so sunny just moments ago. Ignoring the looming clouds, he continued his game, his focus entirely on the ball. Then the first raindrop fell. Jason looked up just in time to feel another cold splash hit his cheek. Within seconds, the sky opened and rain came pouring down in sheets. "Oh no," Jason groaned, grabbing his ball and sprinting toward a nearby tree for cover. The rain was relentless, drenching him to the bone within moments. That's when he heard it, a sound so faint it almost got lost in the patter of raindrops. A cry. Jason paused, unsure if he had imagined it, but then he heard it again, louder this time, unmistakable. It was the sound of a baby crying. His heart pounded as he scanned the park, his eyes finally settling on a large oak tree near the edge of the grass. There, nestled among its roots, was a basket. His breath caught in his throat. Without thinking, Jason ran toward the tree, the rain soaking his clothes. As he approached the basket, the crying grew louder, more desperate. Kneeling down, Jason peered inside, his heart nearly stopping when he saw what lay before him. 2 tiny babies, no older than newborns, lay bundled in a thin blanket. Their skin was dark, almost glistening in the rain, and their tiny fists waved in the air as they cried for comfort. Jason froze. He had never seen a baby up close before, let alone 2, and certainly not in a park in the middle of a rainstorm. His mind raced. Who would leave babies here, all alone? Why? He knew one thing for sure. He couldn't leave them. They were so small, so fragile. With trembling hands, he lifted the basket, surprised at how heavy it was. He glanced around the empty park, hoping to see someone, anyone, who might know what to do, but the park was deserted. The rain was coming down harder now, and the babies were beginning to shiver. Jason had no choice. He had to get them somewhere safe. He thought of his mom. She would know what to do. She always did, but she was going to freak out. Big time. With a deep breath, Jason pulled off his jacket, wrapping it around the babies as best he could to keep them warm. He picked up the basket again and started running, his feet splashing through puddles as he made his way home. The rain was relentless, turning the streets into rivers, but Jason didn't stop. His mind was racing with questions, but he pushed them aside. Right now, all that mattered was getting the babies out of the storm. After what felt like hours, Jason finally reached his house. He was out of breath, soaked to the skin, but he didn't care. His mom would know what to do. She always had a plan. He struggled with the doorknob, his wet hands slipping on the metal. Finally, the door swung open, and he burst inside, dripping water all over the floor. "Mom," he shouted, his voice shaky with a mix of fear and excitement. "Mom, I need you." Emily appeared in the hallway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face a picture of confusion. "Jason, what on earth?" Her voice trailed off as her eyes landed on the basket in her son's arms. Her face went pale as she stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "Jason," she whispered. "What is that?" Jason swallowed hard. "I found them in the park," he said, his voice trembling. "They were all alone, Mom. I couldn't leave them." Emily stared at the tiny babies, her mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. She stepped forward slowly, her motherly instincts kicking in despite the shock. One of the babies let out a small, pitiful cry, and Emily's heart melted. Whoever had left these babies had done so in desperation, she realized. But that didn't matter right now. What mattered was keeping them safe. "Okay," she said, her voice steady but her hands shaking. "We need to get them warm. Jason, grab some towels." Jason nodded and rushed to the bathroom, returning moments later with a stack of fluffy towels. Emily gently lifted the babies from the basket, wrapping them in the towels, her hands trembling as she felt how cold they were. They were so small, so fragile. Who could do this? She thought, her heart aching for the tiny infants. As Jason hovered nearby, his wide eyes full of worry, Emily tried to calm him. "You did the right thing, Jason," she said softly. "You brought them to safety. Now we just need to figure out what to do next." But deep down, Emily was overwhelmed. Who abandoned these babies? And why? As she cradled the tiny, shivering infants, Emily's mind was flooded with questions. She didn't know it yet, but the answers would turn her world upside down. There was a hidden truth buried beneath these babies' innocent cries, a truth that would unravel everything she thought she knew about the world and herself. But for now, all she could do was hold them close and hope that she was strong enough to face whatever came next. The burden of truth. Emily Maxwell paced the living room, her arms cradling the two tiny infants still wrapped in towels. The rain continued to pound against the windows, the storm outside matching the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. She sat on the edge of the couch, gently rocking the babies, trying to still their soft whimpers. Jason stood nearby, watching her intently, unsure of what to do. The house felt suddenly too quiet, too small, as if the weight of the situation was pressing down on them both. "Mom, what are we going to do?" Jason asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily took a deep breath, glancing down at the babies' tiny faces. Their dark eyes fluttered open for a moment, and then they squeezed shut again, as if they could sense the uncertainty in the air. "I don't know, sweetheart," she admitted. "We have to call someone. The police, maybe. Social services. Someone needs to take care of them." Jason frowned, clearly troubled. "But what if they don't come back for them? What if they end up in a home? I mean, they're so little, Mom. They need us." Emily's heart ached at his words. She could see the concern in his eyes, the sense of responsibility he felt. Jason had always been a compassionate child, but this was different. He had found these babies, he had saved them from the storm, and now he felt a bond with them, even if he couldn't put it into words. "I know, Jason," Emily said softly, "but we can't keep them. We don't know anything about them. They could have family out there, someone who's looking for them right now." Jason shook his head, his sandy hair falling into his eyes. "But what if they don't? What if no one's looking for them?" His voice cracked with emotion, and he wiped his eyes quickly, trying to hide his tears. Emily felt a lump forming in her throat. What if Jason was right? What if these babies had been abandoned for good? Could she really just hand them over to the system, knowing they might get lost in it, shuffled from one foster home to another? She had always taught Jason to do the right thing, to help those in need. But this was more than she ever expected. She stood up, gently placing the babies in the middle of the couch, surrounding them with pillows to keep them safe. She grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter and dialed the number for the local police station. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the buttons. She had no idea how to explain the situation, no idea how they would react. After a few rings, a voice answered. "This is Officer Michaels. How can I help you?" Emily swallowed hard. Yes, this is Emily Maxwell. I'm calling because my son found two babies in the park. They were just left there. She stumbled over her words, unsure how to explain. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I'm sorry, ma'am. Did you say your son found babies? Yes, newborns, I think, Emily replied, her voice shaky. They were in a basket, abandoned in the rain. We brought them home, but we don't know what to do. Okay, Officer Michaels said, his tone calm and professional. First of all, thank you for taking them in and getting them out of the weather. That was the right thing to do. I'll need to send an officer over to your house to take a report and assess the situation. Are the babies safe right now? Yes, they're warm and dry, Emily said, glancing back at the couch where the babies were now sleeping. But they seem hungry. I don't have any formula or anything for them. We'll bring someone from Child Protective Services with us, Officer Michaels assured her. They'll know what to do. I'll send someone out right away. Emily hung up the phone and turned to Jason, who had been watching her anxiously. The police are sending someone over, she said quietly. They'll know what to do. Jason's face fell, his earlier hope fading. So they're going to take the babies away. I don't know, honey, Emily admitted, sitting down beside him. But we have to trust that they'll do what's best for them. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound in the room the soft patter of the rain against the windows. Jason leaned his head against his mother's shoulder, and she wrapped her arm around him, feeling his quiet sadness seep into her. As they waited for the authorities to arrive, Emily's mind wandered back to her own childhood. She had grown up in a small, tight-knit town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Her parents had been strict, always preaching the importance of responsibility and appearances. There was no room for mistakes in their house, no room for anything that deviated from their version of a perfect family. Emily had always felt the pressure to live up to their expectations, to never rock the boat. That's why, when she got pregnant with Jason at just 18, her life had fallen apart. Her parents had been furious, ashamed of the scandal it caused in their small town. They had tried to force her to give the baby up for adoption, but Emily had refused. She had loved Jason from the moment she knew she was carrying him, and no amount of pressure from her parents could change that. She had left home shortly after Jason was born, cutting ties with her family and building a life for herself and her son, despite the challenges. Now, sitting here with these two tiny, vulnerable infants, Emily felt that same fierce protectiveness rising in her chest. She understood what it meant to be abandoned, to feel like you didn't belong. She couldn't help but wonder about the circumstances that had led to these babies being left alone in the park. What kind of desperation could drive someone to leave their children behind? And what kind of future awaited them if they were taken away? A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Emily stood up, her heart pounding as she crossed the room to open it. Standing on the front porch were two uniformed officers and a woman holding a clipboard, her expression calm but serious. The woman stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room behind Emily. Mrs. Maxwell, I'm Lisa Warren from Child Protective Services, she said, her tone professional but kind. We're here to take a look at the babies and see what needs to be done. Emily stepped aside, allowing them into the house. Officer Michaels followed, his eyes flicking to Jason, who stood nervously by the couch. Lisa Warren approached the babies, her face softening as she knelt down to check on them. They're beautiful, she said quietly, her voice gentle. Do you know how old they are? Emily shook her head. I don't. We just found them like this. I think they're newborns. Lisa nodded, carefully lifting one of the babies to inspect them more closely. They look healthy, but they're definitely hungry, she said, glancing back at Emily. Do you have any formula? No, Emily said, feeling a pang of guilt. We weren't prepared for this. Officer Michaels stepped forward. We can get someone to bring some supplies over, he offered. In the meantime, we'll take your statement, Mrs. Maxwell. We need to know exactly what happened. Emily nodded and sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she recounted the events of the afternoon. She told them about Jason's discovery, the storm, and the decision to bring the babies home. As she spoke, she could feel the weight of the situation settling over her like a heavy blanket. This wasn't going to be a simple matter. There were so many questions, so many unknowns. Where had these babies come from? Who had left them? And what was going to happen to them now? When Emily finished her statement, Lisa Warren stood up, cradling one of the babies in her arms. "We'll need to take them into temporary custody while we investigate," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "There are procedures we have to follow in cases like this." Jason's face fell, and Emily's heart sank. "So you're taking them away?" she asked, her voice shaky. "For now, yes," Lisa said, her expression sympathetic. "But I promise we'll do everything we can to find their family or place them in a safe, loving home." Jason took a step forward, his eyes pleading. "But what if no one comes for them? What if they end up in a place where no one loves them?" Lisa knelt down to his level, her voice soft and reassuring. "I understand how you feel, Jason, but I promise we'll make sure they're safe. You did an amazing thing today by bringing them out of the rain and keeping them warm. You should be proud of yourself." Jason didn't look reassured. He glanced up at his mother, his eyes full of uncertainty. "Mom, we can't just let them go. We have to do something." Emily's heart twisted in her chest. She wanted to tell him everything would be okay, that the babies would be fine. But the truth was, she didn't know that. She didn't know what would happen once they were taken away. But as she watched Lisa gently carry the babies toward the door, a new feeling began to stir within her, something she hadn't expected. It was a feeling she hadn't felt since the day Jason was born. A fierce, protective instinct. These babies were vulnerable, just like Jason had been, and Emily couldn't shake the thought that they needed her. Not just now, but for the days to come. As the officers prepared to leave, Emily made a decision that would change everything. "Wait," she called out, her voice trembling but firm. "What if we took care of them? At least until you find our family. What if we kept them here?" Lisa turned, surprised. "You mean fostering them temporarily?" Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yes, we'll foster them. I can take care of them until you find out where they belong." Jason's face lit up with hope, and for the first time that day, Emily felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't going to be easy, but she couldn't just stand by and do nothing. These babies had been abandoned once. She wasn't going to let it happen again. Lisa hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll have to check with my supervisor, but if you're serious about this, we can start the process. It won't be quick or simple, but if everything checks out, it could be possible." Emily swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her decision. "I'm serious," she said softly. "We'll do whatever it takes." As the officers left, Emily stood in the doorway, holding Jason's hand. The storm outside had begun to ease, the rain now just a gentle drizzle. But Emily knew the real storm was just beginning. She had no idea what lay ahead, but for now, the babies were safe. And that was all that mattered. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, as the sun slowly peeked through the clouds, Emily Maxwell realized that her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. A new kind of family. The next few days were a whirlwind for Emily. The house, which had always seemed so orderly, suddenly felt chaotic and overflowing. 2 newborns had a way of turning even the quietest home upside down. Bottles, diapers, blankets, and tiny clothes were now scattered around her once immaculate living room. Emily had spent countless sleepless nights feeding the twins, who seemed to take turns waking up every few hours. The exhaustion was settling deep in her bones, but there was something else too, a growing sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Jason had been more than helpful. Every morning, he would jump out of bed early to help with the babies, even though it was summer and he could have slept in. He seemed to have adopted the role of big brother without a second thought, doting on the twins like they were his own siblings. He had named them, too, Jade and Jordan, after his favorite characters in a book he had read recently. Emily hadn't argued with him. Somehow, the names seemed perfect, even if they might not end up being their real names. It was strange how quickly the two babies had become a part of their lives. Emily hadn't intended to get attached, not after what Lisa Warren had told her. The social worker had explained that the chances of the twins staying with them were slim. The state would conduct an investigation, and if any family members were located, the babies would be reunited with them. Emily understood all of that in theory, but in practice, it was much harder to keep her heart at a distance. She found herself waking up in the middle of the night, checking on Jade and Jordan, not just because they needed to be fed, but because she felt the need to watch over them. They were so tiny, so vulnerable, and each time she looked at them, her protective instincts kicked in with a force she hadn't experienced since Jason was a baby. Jason, for his part, seemed to have made it his mission to keep them happy. He spent hours entertaining them with toys and funny faces, making them laugh with his silly antics. Emily would watch from the kitchen, amazed at how easily he had slipped into the role of caretaker. It was as if a whole new side of her son had emerged, one she hadn't seen before. He was growing up right before her eyes, and it filled her with a mix of pride and sadness. He wasn't her little boy anymore. He was becoming someone much more than that. But the shadow of uncertainty loomed over everything. Each time the phone rang, Emily's heart skipped a beat, wondering if it was Lisa calling to say they had found a family for the twins. She knew that at any moment, the fragile sense of family they had built could be shattered. The twins could be taken away, and she and Jason would have to go back to their old lives, lives that now felt incomplete without Jade and Jordan. It was on the fourth day after the babies arrived that the phone call finally came. Emily was in the kitchen, scrubbing bottles while Jason played with the twins on the living room floor. The sound of the phone ringing sent a jolt through her. She wiped her hands on a towel and picked up the receiver, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hello, Mrs. Maxwell, it's Lisa Warren." Emily's breath caught. She could tell from the tone of Lisa's voice that this wasn't a routine check-in. Something had happened. "Is everything okay?" Emily asked, gripping the phone tightly. Lisa hesitated for a moment before answering. "We've completed the initial investigation. I'm afraid there's no easy way to say this, but we haven't been able to locate any family members for the twins. We've searched the database for missing children, and there are no matches. It's likely the babies were deliberately abandoned." Emily's heart sank. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her feel sick. Who could abandon two innocent babies like that? She couldn't wrap her mind around it. "What does that mean for them?" Emily asked quietly, glancing at Jason, who was holding Jordan in his lap, making faces at the baby and giggling as Jordan waved his tiny hands. "It means we'll continue looking, but in cases like this, it's likely the twins will be placed in foster care until a permanent home can be found," Lisa said, her voice soft but firm. "You mentioned that you were willing to foster them temporarily, and we'd like to explore that option with you, if you're still interested." Emily's heart raced. She had thought about this moment over and over, wondering what she would say when it came. She knew it wasn't just about offering temporary shelter anymore. This was about becoming their family, at least for the foreseeable future. But the thought of taking on that responsibility, especially with everything else in her life, was overwhelming. "Yes," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to help them." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Lisa spoke again. "I'll need to conduct a formal home assessment, and there's paperwork to fill out, but we can start the process. Just understand, Mrs. Maxwell, that fostering is a big commitment. There are regular check-ins, and it could be a long time before the twins are placed permanently. You'll be responsible for their care, their medical needs, everything." "I understand," Emily said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm ready for that." After the call ended, Emily stood in the kitchen, staring out the window at the storm clouds gathering once again on the horizon. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, but there was also a sense of peace. She couldn't explain it, but somehow she knew this was the right thing to do. These babies had been abandoned once. She wouldn't let it happen again. Later that night, after Jason had gone to bed and the twins were finally asleep, Emily sat alone in the quiet living room, surrounded by the remnants of the day. Toys were scattered across the floor. Baby bottles were stacked in the sink, and a laundry basket was overflowing with tiny clothes. She should have felt exhausted. She was exhausted. But there was also a strange sense of contentment. For the first time in a long while, her life felt full. Chaotic and uncertain, yes, but full in a way she hadn't expected. Her thoughts drifted back to the days when Jason was a newborn, how hard those early months had been. She had been so young, barely more than a child herself, trying to navigate the challenges of single motherhood while also grieving the loss of the future she had imagined for herself. Her parents had cut ties with her after she refused to give Jason up for adoption, and she had been on her own ever since. But as hard as it had been, she had never regretted her decision to keep Jason. He had become the center of her world, and together they had built a life. A simple life, maybe, but one that was filled with love. Now, with Jade and Jordan in the picture, everything was changing again. And as much as it scared her, Emily found herself embracing the uncertainty. There was something about these babies that called to her, something that made her want to protect them, to fight for them, no matter what it took. The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of soft babbling from the nursery. She smiled as she sat up in bed, stretching her sore muscles. For a moment, she just listened, letting the sound of the babies' voices fill the room. It was a peaceful sound, one that reminded her of the quiet moments she had shared with Jason when he was a baby. She had missed those moments, more than she had realized. She got out of bed and padded down the hall to the nursery, where Jason was already sitting on the floor with the twins, playing with them. He looked up when he saw her, a big grin spreading across his face. "Morning, Mom." Jade and Jordan were up early. "I thought I'd keep them company." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You're a great big brother, Jason," she said, ruffling his hair. Jason beamed at the compliment, then turned his attention back to the babies, who were cooing happily at him. As Emily watched them, she felt a sense of contentment settle over her. It wasn't the life she had expected, but it was a good life. And for now, that was enough. That afternoon, Lisa Warren came by for the formal home assessment. Emily had spent the morning cleaning the house from top to bottom, making sure everything was perfect. She knew that fostering was a serious commitment, and she wanted to show Lisa that she was ready for it. When Lisa arrived, she greeted Emily with a warm smile and a firm handshake. "You've done a great job with the babies," she said as she looked around the house. "I can see how much care you've put into their routine." Emily felt a surge of pride. "Thank you. I've tried to make them feel at home." Lisa spent the next hour going over the details of fostering, explaining the process and what would be expected of Emily as a foster parent. There were regular check-ins, medical appointments, and a host of other responsibilities that came with caring for two newborns. It was a lot to take in, but Emily listened carefully, nodding along as Lisa spoke. Finally, Lisa put down her clipboard and smiled. "You're doing great, Mrs. Maxwell. I think you'll be an excellent foster parent." Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you. I just want to do what's best for them." Lisa nodded. "I know. And if you ever have any questions or concerns, you can always call me. We're here to support you through this process." After Lisa left, Emily sat down on the couch, feeling a mix of relief and excitement. The home assessment had gone well. And now, the real journey was beginning. It was daunting, but Emily felt ready for it. She wasn't just taking care of these babies temporarily. She was building something new, a new kind of family. As the weeks went by, the bond between Emily, Jason, and the twins grew stronger. They settled into a routine, And even though there were still moments of chaos and exhaustion, there was also joy. Emily found herself laughing more, smiling more. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. One evening, as the sun set and the house grew quiet, Emily sat on the porch, watching the last rays of light fade from the sky. Jason was inside, playing with the twins, their laughter echoing through the house. Emily closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air wash over her. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if the twins would stay with them forever, or if one day they would be taken away. But for now, in this moment, she knew one thing for certain. They were a family. A real, imperfect, beautiful family. And that was enough. For now, that was enough. But just as she let herself relax, her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her peaceful moment. Emily sighed, glancing down at the screen. It was Lisa Warren again. She frowned, her heart skipping a beat. What could this be about? With a sense of dread creeping in, Emily answered the call. The hidden past unveiled. Emily's heart raced as she held the phone to her ear, hearing Lisa Warren's voice on the other end. The peaceful, contented moment she had just shared with her family seemed to dissolve in an instant. Something was wrong. Lisa's tone was calm, but held an edge of urgency that Emily couldn't ignore. "Mrs. Maxwell, I'm sorry to call you so late," Lisa began, her voice steady but strained. "We've had a development in the case of the twins. I know you've done a wonderful job caring for them, and I appreciate everything you've done. But I need to come by tomorrow morning to discuss some unexpected findings." Emily's stomach twisted. She could feel the weight of Lisa's words settling over her like a cold fog. "What kind of findings?" she asked, her voice trembling. There was a pause on the other end, and then Lisa sighed. "It's about their birth parents. We've uncovered some information that changes things. I'd rather explain it in person." Emily gripped the phone tighter, her mind racing. She had known all along that the twins might not stay with her forever, that their biological family could appear at any moment. But now that the moment had come, it felt like a nightmare. Her bond with Jade and Jordan had deepened over the past weeks, and the thought of losing them was unbearable. "I understand," Emily said quietly. "I'll see you tomorrow." After hanging up the phone, Emily sat in silence, her thoughts spiraling out of control. What had Lisa found? Were the twins' parents still out there? And if so, why had they abandoned their children in a park? It didn't make sense. None of it did. Jason appeared in the doorway, his face full of concern. "Mom, is everything okay?" Emily forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just a call from Lisa. She's coming over tomorrow to talk about the twins." Jason's eyes widened, and he immediately crossed the room to sit beside her on the porch. Are they taking them away?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, her voice soft. She looked down at her hands, which were shaking slightly. "We'll find out tomorrow." Jason was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned against his mother, resting his head on her shoulder. "I don't want them to go, Mom. They're like my little brother and sister now." Emily felt a lump form in her throat, but she didn't let the tears come. Not in front of Jason. Instead, she wrapped her arm around him, pulling him close. "I know," she whispered. "I don't want them to go either." That night, sleep didn't come easily. Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the past few weeks like a movie reel. She thought of the first moment she had seen the babies, soaked and shivering in the basket, their tiny cries piercing the storm. She remembered the way Jason had taken to them immediately, how he had played with them, laughed with them, and cared for them as if they were his own siblings. And she remembered the warmth that had filled her heart each time she held them in her arms, knowing that she was giving them a safe and loving home. But now, all of that was at risk. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. Jason was sitting on the floor with the twins, but his usual energy was subdued. Even Jade and Jordan seemed to sense the tension in the air. Emily busied herself in the kitchen, trying to keep her hands occupied as she waited for Lisa to arrive. But no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, the gnawing anxiety in her chest wouldn't go away. At exactly 10 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Emily's heart leaped into her throat. She quickly wiped her hands on a towel and made her way to the front door, taking a deep breath before opening it. Lisa stood on the porch, her face calm but serious. Beside her was a man Emily hadn't seen before, a tall, well-dressed man with dark hair and sharp features. He carried a briefcase and wore an expression that was difficult to read, somewhere between professional detachment and guarded sympathy. "Good morning, Mrs. Maxwell," Lisa said, offering a small smile. "I'd like to introduce you to Detective Eric Daniels. He's been working on the investigation regarding the twins." Emily's stomach churned. She hadn't expected a detective to be involved. What did this mean? "Please come in," Emily said, stepping aside to let them into the house. Lisa and Detective Daniels entered the living room, where Jason was still sitting with the twins. He looked up at them, his eyes wide with fear, and Emily could see him tense up as the reality of the situation sank in. The detective glanced at the twins, but his expression remained neutral. Lisa sat down on the couch, motioning for Emily to join her. Detective Daniels remained standing, his hands folded in front of him. The air in the room felt heavy, as if the very walls were bracing for whatever news was about to be delivered. "Emily," Lisa began, her voice gentle, "we've uncovered some information about the twins' background. It took longer than we expected because their birth parents hadn't reported them missing. But we've recently discovered some complicated details." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She braced herself for the worst. The twins' mother, Lisa continued, was involved in a human trafficking ring. Emily's eyes widened in shock. What? What do you mean?" Detective Daniels stepped forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "Their mother, a woman named Melanie Johnson, was coerced into a trafficking operation years ago. She had no criminal record, no history of violence, but she was manipulated, trapped in a situation where she couldn't escape. We believe she became pregnant while still under the control of the traffickers." Emily's mind spun, trying to process what she was hearing. "So, she was a victim?" "Yes," Detective Daniels confirmed. "She had been trying to get out for years, but the organization she was involved with is dangerous. It's taken us a long time to gather enough evidence to even begin investigating it properly. And it appears that when she realized she couldn't care for the babies, she abandoned them in the park as a last-ditch effort to protect them from the people who were controlling her." Emily felt sick. The image of the twins' mother, desperate and trapped, abandoning her babies in a park to save them from a life of exploitation, made her heart ache. How had this woman survived such a nightmare? And how had the twins ended up in her care? "Where is she now?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Detective Daniels sighed. "We've been searching for her, but she's disappeared. We believe she may be in hiding, either to escape the traffickers or to avoid law enforcement. But at this point, we don't know." Lisa leaned forward, placing a hand on Emily's arm. "This changes things, Emily. The state will need to make a decision about what's best for the twins moving forward. With no immediate family coming forward and their mother missing, it's possible they'll remain in foster care for a while. But there's another option." Emily looked up, her heart pounding. "What option?" "You could apply to become their permanent guardian," Lisa said softly. "If their mother can't be found, and there are no other family members willing or able to take them, you could take legal responsibility for them. It's a long process, and it comes with a lot of challenges, but if you're willing, you could become their family." Emily's mind reeled. Permanent guardian. She had known from the beginning that fostering was a possibility, but the idea of becoming their legal guardian, of becoming their mother in every way that mattered, hadn't seemed real until this moment. It was a huge decision, one that would change her life and Jason's life forever. But as she looked over at the twins, playing quietly on the floor, she couldn't imagine her life without them. Over the past few weeks, they had become a part of her family, a part of her heart. Could she really walk away from that? Could she let them go? Jason, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly spoke up. "Mom, we can't let them go. They need us." Emily's heart swelled with emotion. She hadn't realized how much this decision meant to Jason too. He had bonded with the twins in a way she hadn't expected, and the thought of losing them was as painful for him as it was for her. Emily turned back to Lisa, her voice steady. "What do I need to do?" Lisa smiled softly, relief and gratitude in her eyes. "We'll start the paperwork. It won't be easy, Emily, and there will be a lot of hurdles to overcome. But if you're committed to this, we'll do everything we can to make it happen." Detective Daniels nodded, his expression softening for the first time. "You're doing something incredible, Mrs. Maxwell. These children deserve a chance at a real life, and it looks like you're the person who can give them that." As they discussed the details, Emily felt a sense of clarity wash over her. It was as if everything in her life had led to this moment. She had faced so much hardship, so much loss, but now she had the chance to give these children the love and security they needed. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges ahead, legal battles, and emotional upheaval, but Emily was ready to face them. After Lisa and Detective Daniels left, Emily sat down on the floor next to Jason and the twins. She watched as Jade and Jordan giggled at Jason's silly faces, their tiny hands reaching for him. For the first time in weeks, Emily allowed herself to imagine a future where they stayed. A future where she, Jason, Jade, and Jordan were a real family. "I think we're going to be okay," Emily said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. But Jason heard her, and he smiled. "Yeah, Mom," he said. "We're going to be okay." That night, after tucking the twins into their cribs and saying goodnight to Jason, Emily sat alone in the quiet of the living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. The past weeks had been a whirlwind, full of unexpected challenges and emotions she hadn't been prepared for. But now, as she looked around at the home they had created together, she realized something she hadn't before. This was where the twins belonged, not just for now, but for always. And with that realization came a sense of peace. Emily knew there were still battles to fight. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. And that was enough. But as Emily prepared to close her eyes, the phone buzzed on the coffee table beside her. She hesitated, dreading another late-night call, but something told her to answer it. When she did, the voice on the other end sent a chill down her spine. "Mrs. Maxwell." The voice was soft, almost trembling. "My name is Melanie. I'm the twins' mother." Emily froze. Time seemed to stop as she gripped the phone tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. A mother's plea. The silence in the room was suffocating as Emily sat frozen, clutching the phone to her ear. The name, Melanie, echoed in her mind, reverberating like a distant bell. This was the woman whose shadow had loomed over their lives for the past few weeks, the woman who had abandoned Jade and Jordan in a park, and the mother who, despite everything, had somehow resurfaced. Emily's mouth went dry, her heart pounding as she tried to find her voice. "Melanie?" she whispered, barely able to get the word out. "Yes," came the quiet response, shaky but firm. "I'm their mother. I'm sorry I haven't come forward before now, but I didn't know who to trust. I still don't know if I'm doing the right thing by calling you." Emily swallowed hard, trying to control the rush of emotions flooding her. Part of her wanted to hang up, to protect the fragile peace she had built with Jade and Jordan, but she knew she couldn't do that. This was their mother, their biological mother, and whatever this conversation held, it was a bridge they needed to cross. "Why now?" Emily asked, her voice stronger than she felt. "Why are you calling me now, after all this time?" There was a long pause on the other end, and Emily could hear Melanie's shallow breathing, as if she was struggling to form the words. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I've been running. Melanie said quietly. From the people who hurt me, from my past, from the mistakes I've made. I never wanted to abandon them. I never wanted to leave my babies, but I thought they would be safer without me. Emily felt a tightness in her chest as she listened. She had imagined this conversation 100 times, imagined what kind of person would leave their children behind, and yet, hearing Melanie's broken voice, she didn't feel anger. She felt something closer to understanding, an understanding that scared her. "Tell me what happened," Emily said softly, settling into the couch as if preparing for a long story. "Tell me everything." On the other end of the line, Melanie took a deep breath, and when she began to speak, her words came slowly, as if each one was being dragged out from a deep well of pain. "I grew up in a small town, not unlike yours, I imagine," Melanie began, her voice distant. "I was a good kid, good grades, stayed out of trouble. But my family life, my family was broken. My mom was never around, and my dad, he was violent when he drank, and he drank a lot. I wanted out. I wanted to escape. When I turned 18, I moved to the city, hoping for a fresh start. But the city, it chewed me up." She paused, and Emily could hear her swallowing hard, as if trying to keep her emotions in check. "I got involved with the wrong people," Melanie continued, her voice thick. "At first, I thought they were friends. I thought they were helping me, giving me a place to stay, a job, and a way out. But it was all a lie. They were grooming me, controlling me. And by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. They owned me, body and soul." Emily's heart sank. She had heard of stories like this before, stories of young women who were lured into dangerous situations by people they trusted. But hearing it now, hearing it from the mother of the twins, made it feel all too real. "I tried to escape so many times," Melanie continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But every time I ran, they found me. I didn't have anywhere to go, no one to turn to. I was trapped. And then I got pregnant. I didn't even know who the father was. It didn't matter though, because when I found out I was having twins, something in me changed. I knew I had to get out, not just for me, but for them. They deserved a chance at life, a chance to be free." Emily could feel tears welling in her eyes as she listened. She could picture Melanie, scared and alone, trying to protect her unborn children from the horrors of her life. It was heartbreaking. "I ran when I was 7 months pregnant," Melanie said, her voice trembling. "I found a shelter for women like me, but even there, I wasn't safe. The people who controlled me, they had eyes everywhere. I stayed hidden as long as I could, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they found me again. So, after I gave birth, I made the hardest decision of my life." Her voice broke, and Emily could hear her crying on the other end of the line. She could feel the weight of Melanie's guilt and sorrow through the phone, as if it were a physical thing pressing down on both of them. "I left them in the park because I thought someone like you, would find them and give them the life I couldn't. I thought if I left them in a place where people cared, they'd be safe. I was wrong, wasn't I?" Emily shook her head, even though Melanie couldn't see her. "No," she said softly. "You weren't wrong. They're safe. They're more than safe. But Melanie, you should have come forward sooner." "I know," Melanie whispered, her voice cracking. "But I was scared. I still am. The people who controlled me, they're dangerous. They know about the twins. If they find out I'm alive and that I've contacted you, they could come for them. That's why I've stayed away. I've been in hiding, trying to protect them from a distance, but I can't stay away anymore. I need to see them. I need to make sure they're okay." Emily's heart raced. This was what she had been dreading, the moment when Melanie would want to see her children, to reclaim them. But the situation was far more complicated than Emily had ever imagined. It wasn't just about reuniting a mother with her babies. It was about protecting them from a past that still had its claws in Melanie. Melanie, Emily said, her voice firm but kind. You need to understand something. These children have been through a lot. They found a home here. Jason and we've become their family. I can't just let you walk back into their lives without knowing what's going to happen next. You're in danger. And if you're in danger, that means they're in danger too. I know, Melanie whispered, her voice full of anguish. That's why I'm calling. I'm not asking to take them away from you. I just want to see them. Please, Emily. Just once. I need to know they're okay. Emily's mind raced, torn between compassion for this woman and the fierce protectiveness she felt for the twins. She couldn't deny the pain in Melanie's voice, the deep love she clearly had for her children. But she also couldn't ignore the risks. If Melanie was still being hunted by dangerous people, bringing her into the twins' lives could put them all in jeopardy. I need to think about this, Emily said quietly, her voice trembling. I need to talk to the social worker to make sure it's safe. There was a long pause on the other end, and then Melanie's voice came back, softer than before. I understand. I don't want to put them in danger. Thank you for taking care of them, Emily. I didn't know who else to turn to. I'll be in touch. The call ended, leaving Emily sitting in the silence of the living room, her mind spinning. She felt as if she had been thrust into the middle of a storm, caught between two impossible choices. On one hand, there was Melanie, a mother who had been through hell and wanted nothing more than to see her children. On the other hand, there were Jade and Jordan, two babies who had finally found safety and stability in a home where they were loved. Emily wasn't sure what to do. She knew she needed advice, needed someone to help her navigate this delicate situation. But she also knew that this decision, whatever it turned out to be, would change everything. The next morning, Emily called Lisa Warren, explaining everything that had happened the night before. Lisa listened carefully, her voice calm and measured, but Emily could sense the concern in her tone. This is a complicated situation, Emily, Lisa said after a long pause. Melanie's story is heartbreaking, but we can't make any decisions without knowing all the facts. If what she's saying is true, if she's still in danger, then we need to protect the children at all costs. That includes limiting contact until we can be sure it's safe. Emily nodded, even though she knew Lisa couldn't see her. So what do we do? How do we move forward? I'm going to notify the authorities, Lisa said firmly. We need to get law enforcement involved. If Melanie is being hunted by these traffickers, we need to make sure she's safe too. But for now, I'd advise you not to make any promises. Let's take this one step at a time. Emily hung up the phone, feeling a little more grounded, but the weight of the decision still lingered. She couldn't shake the image of Melanie, alone and terrified, desperately trying to keep her children safe from the shadows of her past. But she also couldn't ignore the fact that Jade and Jordan were now her responsibility. She had promised to protect them, and that was exactly what she intended to do. That afternoon, Jason came home from school, his usual exuberance dimmed by the knowledge that something was wrong. He found Emily sitting on the porch, her hands folded in her lap, staring out at the horizon. He sat down beside her, his brow furrowed with worry. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft. Emily forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm okay, Jason. Just thinking." Jason studied her for a moment, then leaned his head against her shoulder. "Is it about the twins?" Emily nodded. "Yes. Their birth mother called last night." Jason sat up straighter, his eyes wide with surprise. "She did. What did she say?" Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. "She wants to see them, Jason. But it's complicated. She's in trouble, and if she comes here, she might put all of us in danger." Jason's face fell, and for a moment, he was quiet. Then, after a long pause, he asked, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Emily admitted. "I want to protect them, but I also don't want to keep them from their mother. It's hard, Jason. I'm not sure what the right thing to do is." Jason was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and took his mother's hand, squeezing it gently. "Whatever you decide, Mom, I know you'll do what's best. You always do." Emily smiled, feeling a surge of warmth at her son's words. He had grown so much over the past few weeks, and she couldn't help but feel proud of the kind, thoughtful young man he was becoming. "Thank you, Jason," she said softly, wrapping her arm around him. "I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out together." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the porch, Emily allowed herself a moment of peace. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her choices. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on, with Jason by her side and the twins' safety as her top priority. And somewhere out there, Melanie was waiting for the chance to see her children, waiting for the chance to redeem herself. But until Emily knew for sure that it was safe, she would hold on to the fragile family she had built, no matter what. But she had no idea just how dangerous the next steps would be. The reckoning. The days after Melanie's call stretched into an agonizing limbo for Emily. Each hour felt like a countdown to something inevitable, though she had no idea what it would be. Law enforcement had been contacted, and while Lisa Warren kept Emily updated on the situation, there was still no concrete resolution. Melanie's whereabouts were unknown, the traffickers were still at large, and the twins' fate seemed to hang in the balance, suspended between the past and the uncertain future. Emily threw herself into caring for Jade and Jordan, trying to keep their routine as normal as possible, even though nothing felt normal anymore. Every time the phone rang, her heart leaped into her throat, and every knock at the door sent a shiver of anxiety through her body. But as much as she tried to shield Jason from the growing tension, he was too perceptive to miss the change in their home. He had been quieter lately, more withdrawn, though he still doted on the twins as if they were his own siblings. It was a Thursday afternoon, nearly a week after Melanie's phone call, when the storm finally broke. Emily was in the kitchen preparing bottles for Jade and Jordan, when Jason came running into the house, his face pale and eyes wide with alarm. "Mom," he gasped, breathless. "There's a car outside. 2 men. I think something's wrong." Emily's heart lurched. She dropped the bottle she had been holding, her hand suddenly trembling. "Stay here with the twins," she said, her voice tight. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone." Jason's face was stricken with fear, but he nodded, scooping up Jade from her playmat and cradling her protectively. "Be careful, Mom," he whispered, his eyes filled with a worry far beyond his years. Emily grabbed her phone and quickly dialed Lisa's number, her pulse racing. The phone rang once, twice, but there was no answer. Panic surged through her. She couldn't wait. She had to face this, whatever it was, on her own. With her heart hammering in her chest, Emily walked to the front door and peeked through the curtains. Parked at the curb was a sleek black SUV, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. 2 men stood by the vehicle, both tall and broad-shouldered, their dark clothing giving them a menacing air. They hadn't approached the house yet, but they were clearly watching it, as if waiting for the right moment. Emily's blood ran cold. She knew, instinctively, that these men weren't here for a friendly visit. These were the shadows Melanie had been running from, the predators who had controlled her life. And now they had found her children. Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself. She couldn't let fear paralyze her. She had to protect Jade and Jordan, no matter what. Grabbing the nearest thing she could find, a heavy fireplace poker, she inched open the door and stepped onto the porch, trying to keep her voice steady. "Who are you?" she called out, gripping the poker tightly. "What do you want?" The men exchanged glances, and then one of them, an older man with graying hair and a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. He raised his hands in a mock gesture of peace, but his eyes were cold and calculating. "We're just here to talk, Mom," the man said, his voice smooth but laced with threat. "No need for that poker. We're not looking for trouble." Emily didn't lower her weapon. Talk about what? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We're looking for someone. A woman named Melanie Johnson. We understand she's got something that belongs to us. Maybe you know where she is. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. This was worse than she had imagined. These men weren't just here for Melanie. They were here for Jade and Jordan. She could see it in the way they looked at her, in the way their eyes shifted toward the house, as if calculating their next move. I don't know where Melanie is, Emily said, her voice firm. And you need to leave. The man's smile faltered, and his expression darkened. You see, that's where you're wrong. We know she called you. We know she's in contact with you. So why don't you do yourself a favor and tell us where she is? Save everyone a lot of trouble. Emily's grip tightened on the poker, her mind racing. She had to stall them, had to buy time. She had to protect the twins and Jason at all costs. I haven't seen her, she lied, trying to keep her voice steady. And even if I had, I wouldn't tell you. She doesn't want anything to do with you. The man's smile vanished entirely. His eyes hardened, and he took another step forward, his presence looming. Lady, I don't think you understand who you're dealing with. We don't take kindly to people lying to us. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time. Where is Melanie? Emily's mind raced. She was alone, outnumbered, and these men were dangerous. She needed help, but she couldn't risk running back into the house and leaving the front door unguarded. Her phone was still in her pocket, but calling for help seemed impossible without them noticing. She had to think of something, anything, to get out of this. And then, in a split-second decision, she made her move. She swung the poker toward the man, catching him off guard. He stepped back, his hands flying up to defend himself, but the force of Emily's blow sent him staggering. His partner lunged forward, but Emily was already moving, sprinting back into the house and slamming the door shut behind her. Jason, she shouted, her voice shaking. Call 911 now. Jason appeared in the hallway, his face pale but determined. He ran to the phone, dialing with trembling hands, while Emily locked the door and shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. She could hear the men outside, their voices rising in anger as they banged on the door, trying to force their way in. Emily's heart pounded as she grabbed the twins and hurried them into the bedroom, locking the door behind her. Stay here, she whispered to Jason, who was holding Jordan protectively. Don't open the door for anyone. The police are on their way. Jason nodded, his eyes wide with fear but resolute. He hugged Jordan close, rocking him gently as the baby began to fuss. Emily felt a surge of pride for her son. He was brave, braver than she had ever imagined. But there was no time to dwell on that now. She could hear the men outside, the sound of wood splintering as they tried to break down the front door. Emily's heart raced as she frantically looked around the room for something. Anything that could help them. Her mind raced through the possibilities, but nothing seemed like enough. And then, a new sound broke through the chaos. The blaring wail of police sirens. Relief surged through Emily as she heard the commotion outside. The men cursed, and she could hear the scuffle of boots as they ran back to their car. A moment later, the roar of an engine filled the air as the SUV sped away, tires screeching as it disappeared down the street. Emily sank to the floor, her body trembling with adrenaline. They were safe. For now. Minutes later, the police arrived, and Emily unlocked the front door to let them in. Jason followed close behind, still holding Jordan, his face pale but steady. The officers quickly assessed the situation, taking statements from both Emily and Jason, while other officers searched the area for the men who had tried to break in. But the men were long gone, vanished into the shadows just as quickly as they had appeared. One of the officers, a tall woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, took Emily aside after the initial chaos had subsided. "You're lucky you acted quickly," she said, her voice firm. "These men are part of a trafficking ring we've been tracking for a while. They're dangerous, and they don't take threats lightly. You and your children need protection." Emily's heart sank. What do you mean? Are they coming back? The officer nodded grimly. It's possible. If they believe you know where Melanie is, they'll keep coming until they find her, or the children. Emily felt a wave of nausea wash over her. What do I do? We'll station officers nearby for protection, but we need to act fast. If you know where Melanie is, or if she tries to contact you again, you need to tell us immediately. The sooner we get her into protective custody, the sooner we can end this. Emily nodded, her mind spinning. She had no idea where Melanie was, but she knew that this situation was spiraling out of control. The threat wasn't just against Melanie anymore. It was against her, Jason, and the twins. And she couldn't allow that. That night, after the police had left and the house had settled into an uneasy silence, Emily sat alone in the living room, her thoughts racing. The weight of what had happened pressed down on her like a physical burden. She had always known that taking in Jade and Jordan came with risks, but she hadn't realized just how dangerous those risks could be. The phone rang again, and Emily's heart leaped into her throat. She answered it quickly, her hands trembling. Emily. Melanie's voice came through, soft and scared. I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. Emily closed her eyes.